The thick, acrid odor of pesticides hung heavy in the air as Samantha watched in horror from her kitchen window. Next door, the notorious Homeowners Association president, Karen, was dousing the bushes with a chemical-filled spray, a twisted smirk on her lips. Samantha's heart raced. She had to stop this madness before Karen's toxic fumes seeped into her own home. Throwing open the door, she marched across the manicured lawn, every step fueled by rage. "Karen, what the hell do you think you're doing?" she shouted, closing the distance between them. Karen whirled around, her eyes narrowing. "I'm simply maintaining the landscaping, as per our HOA guidelines," she sneered, her finger tightening on the trigger. "But those are my bushes you're poisoning," Samantha cried, throwing herself in front of the nozzle. "Stop this immediately." Karen's expression hardened. "You know the rules, Samantha. All landscaping must be approved by the board. These bushes were not." "I don't care about your damn rules," Samantha yelled, her voice cracking with desperation. "This is my property, and I won't let you destroy it." The two women locked eyes, their bodies tense, the air thick with tension. Samantha knew she had to act fast before Karen doused her in the toxic spray. Suddenly, a sharp gasp escaped Karen's lips, and the spray slipped from her trembling fingers. Her face flushed crimson, and she began to wheeze, clawing at her throat. Samantha watched in stunned silence as Karen collapsed to the ground, her body convulsing. Realization dawned. Karen was having an allergic reaction to the very chemicals she had been using. Abandoning her fear, Samantha rushed to Karen's side, fumbling for her phone to call an ambulance. As the wail of sirens pierced the air, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at the sight of the tyrannical HOA president struggling for breath. But as the paramedics loaded Karen into the ambulance, Samantha couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this was only the beginning of a much darker, more sinister power struggle. The ambulance sped away, leaving Samantha alone on the lawn, her heart pounding. She knew that Karen's near-death experience wouldn't deter the vindictive HOA president for long. In fact, Samantha was certain that this was just the first salvo in a much larger battle. Retreating to her home, Samantha began to piece together a plan. She needed to gather evidence, build a case, and rally the other homeowners to her cause. Karen and the corrupt HOA had gone too far, and Samantha was determined to take them down. Over the next few days, Samantha meticulously documented every infraction, every abuse of power, and every underhanded tactic employed by the HOA. She interviewed her neighbors, uncovering a web of lies, intimidation, and outright theft perpetrated by the board. Armed with her findings, Samantha called an emergency neighborhood meeting, her hands trembling with nervous energy. As the other homeowners filed in, faces etched with concern, Samantha knew that the time for action had arrived. "My friends, we have been living under the tyrannical rule of the HOA for far too long," she began, her voice steady and resolute. "They have violated our rights, stolen our money, and threatened us into submission. But no more." The crowd erupted in cheers and shouts of agreement, their anger and frustration palpable. Seizing the momentum, Samantha laid out her plan. A lawsuit that would expose the HOA's corruption and restore power to the homeowners. However, as the meeting drew to a close, a sense of unease settled over the group. They all knew that taking on the HOA would be a dangerous, high-stakes gamble, one that could cost them dearly. Samantha, too, felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but she was determined to see it through. The future of her neighborhood and her own family's safety hung in the balance. With a deep breath, Samantha steeled her resolve. She would not back down, no matter the cost. The battle lines had been drawn, and the war for control of the HOA had just begun. The courthouse steps were crowded with homeowners, their faces etched with determination as they waited for the verdict. Samantha stood at the front of the group, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. After months of painstaking research and legal maneuvering, the day of reckoning had finally arrived. The lawsuit against the corrupt HOA was about to be decided, and the stakes couldn't be higher. As the judge emerged from the building, an eerie silence fell over the crowd. Samantha held her breath, her palms sweating, as the judge began to read the ruling. This court finds the Homeowners Association guilty of financial mismanagement, abuse of power, and willful disregard for the well-being of the residents. The judge's voice was stern, leaving no room for interpretation. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, quickly replaced by thunderous applause and cheers. Samantha felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew the battle was far from over. Suddenly, the courthouse doors burst open, and a throng of angry HOA members spilled out, their faces twisted with rage. At their center was Karen, her eyes burning with a dangerous fire. "This isn't over, Samantha," she screamed, her voice shrill and venomous. "We won't let you take away our power." Samantha stepped forward, her chin held high. "Your reign of terror is over, Karen. The homeowners have spoken, and the court has ruled in our favor. It's time for you and your cronies to step down." Karen's lips curled into a malicious smile. "Oh, we're not going anywhere. In fact, we have a few tricks up our sleeve." Before Samantha could react, the HOA members surged forward, their bodies colliding with the homeowners in a chaotic display of violence. Fists flew, and shouts echoed through the air as the two sides battled for control. Samantha found herself caught in the middle, struggling to maintain her footing as the melee raged around her. She knew that this was far from over. The HOA was determined to hold onto its power, no matter the cost. As the dust settled and the police arrived to restore order, Samantha realized that the true battle was just beginning. The war for the soul of her neighborhood had reached a critical juncture, and the outcome would determine the fate of her family and her community. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the judge called the proceedings to order. Samantha sat with her legal team, her stomach in knots as she prepared to face off against the formidable Karen and the HOA. This was no ordinary civil case. The future of the entire neighborhood hung in the balance. The HOA had filed a countersuit, alleging that the homeowners' lawsuit was nothing more than a baseless attack on their authority. As the arguments unfolded, Samantha could barely contain her outrage. The HOA's lawyer spun a web of lies and half-truths, painting the homeowners as a group of troublemakers who were unwilling to follow the rules. But Samantha and her team were prepared. They had meticulously compiled evidence of the HOA's misdeeds, from financial mismanagement to blatant intimidation tactics. One by one, they tore apart the HOA's case, exposing the corruption at its core. Throughout the proceedings, Karen sat in the front row, her eyes narrowed with a burning intensity. Samantha couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. She knew that the HOA president was not one to go down without a fight. As the final arguments drew to a close, the judge announced a recess, promising to deliver a verdict the following day. Samantha and the other homeowners filed out of the courtroom, their nerves frayed but their spirits high. "We've got them on the ropes," one of the homeowners whispered to Samantha. "There's no way they can wriggle out of this one." Samantha nodded, but she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the HOA had one final, desperate move up their sleeve. Karen's steely gaze had told her as much. The woman was a cornered animal, and she would stop at nothing to protect her domain. As the sun set over the neighborhood, Samantha found herself unable to rest. She paced her living room, her mind racing with scenarios, each more dire than the last. She knew that the next day would be a pivotal moment, one that would determine the fate of her community. Whatever happened, Samantha was determined to fight to the bitter end. The stakes were too high, and the cost of failure was unthinkable. The war for the HOA was far from over, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to emerge victorious. The courtroom was deathly silent as the judge delivered the verdict. Samantha held her breath, her heart pounding in her ears as she waited for the final decision. This court finds in favor of the homeowners, the judge proclaimed, his voice firm and unwavering. The Homeowners Association is hereby ordered to cease all operations and relinquish control to a court-appointed management company. A collective cheer rose from the assembled homeowners, but Samantha remained cautious. She knew that Karen and the HOA would not go down without a fight. As the judge exited the room, Samantha approached the HOA's legal team, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "This isn't over, is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Karen, who had been seated at the table, suddenly stood, a twisted grin plastered across her face. "Oh, it's far from over, Samantha. You may have won this battle, but the war is just beginning." Samantha felt a chill run down her spine as Karen's words sank in. She knew that the HOA president was not one to be trifled with. Her thirst for power was insatiable, and she would stop at nothing to regain control. As the homeowners celebrated their victory, Samantha couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was about to go horribly wrong. She had a nagging suspicion that Karen had a plan, one that would plunge the neighborhood into a dark and uncertain future. In the days that followed, Samantha's fears were confirmed. The court-appointed management company found itself facing a barrage of legal challenges from the HOA, each one more frivolous and disruptive than the last. It was clear that Karen and her cohorts were doing everything in their power to undermine the new regime. Samantha knew that she had to act quickly, but the stakes had never been higher. Every move she made had the potential to backfire, with devastating consequences for her family and her community. She was walking a tightrope, and one false step could send them all plummeting into the abyss. As the battle lines hardened and the tension in the neighborhood reached a fever pitch, Samantha realized that the true war for control of the HOA had only just begun. The future of her home hung in the balance, and she was determined to fight to the bitter end. The air was thick with tension as Samantha and the other homeowners gathered in the community center for an emergency meeting. The court-appointed management company had been forced to concede defeat, overwhelmed by the relentless legal attacks from the HOA. Karen stood at the front of the room, her eyes glinting with malicious triumph. "Welcome, my fellow homeowners," she began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "As you all know, the court has seen fit to hand over control of our HOA to a bunch of incompetent outsiders." The homeowners erupted in angry murmurs, but Karen raised a hand, silencing them. "But fear not. We, the board of directors, have taken steps to reclaim what is rightfully ours." Samantha felt her blood run cold. She knew that Karen had something truly sinister up her sleeve, and she braced herself for the worst. "Effective immediately," Karen continued, "the HOA is reinstating all of its previous rules and regulations. Anyone who dares to defy us will face severe consequences." The crowd erupted in outrage, but Karen remained unfazed. "Furthermore, we've decided to levy a special assessment on all homeowners, one that will be used to fund our legal battle against this unjust ruling." Samantha's heart sank. She knew that most of her neighbors would be unable to afford the exorbitant fees, and that those who couldn't pay would be at the mercy of the HOA's wrath. As the meeting descended into chaos, Samantha caught Karen's eye, and she saw a glimmer of triumph in the woman's gaze. It was clear that the HOA president had no intention of relinquishing her power, and that she was willing to go to any lengths to maintain her grip on the community. Samantha knew that she had to act quickly, but the stakes had never been higher. Every move she made had the potential to backfire, with devastating consequences for her family and her neighbors. The future of her home hung in the balance, and she was determined to fight to the bitter end. As the homeowners filed out of the community center, their faces etched with fear and frustration, Samantha knew that the true war for control of the HOA had only just begun. The battle lines had been drawn, and the outcome would determine the fate of her entire community. The neighborhood was in turmoil as the homeowners struggled to come to terms with the HOA's brazen power grab. Samantha felt a growing sense of dread as she watched her neighbors scramble to scrape together the funds for the exorbitant special assessment. Karen and her cronies, meanwhile, seemed to revel in the chaos, their eyes gleaming with a malicious triumph. Samantha knew that they had no intention of backing down, and that they would stop at nothing to crush any resistance. Determined to fight back, Samantha gathered a group of the most vocal and passionate homeowners, each one equally outraged by the HOA's tactics. Together, they hatched a plan. A bold, risky move that could either liberate the community or plunge it into even deeper peril. The night of the plan's execution, Samantha's heart pounded as she and her team made their way to the HOA's headquarters. The building was dark and foreboding, a testament to the power that the corrupt organization wielded. Swallowing her fear, Samantha led the way, her fingers trembling as she picked the lock. Once inside, they swiftly made their way to the HOA's servers, where they began to systematically delete and sabotage the organization's records. The sound of the computers whirring and the frantic tapping of keys filled the air, punctuated only by the occasional gasp of triumph as another file was wiped clean. Samantha knew that they were racing against the clock, for it was only a matter of time before the HOA discovered their intrusion. Just as they were about to make their escape, a sudden movement in the shadows caused them all to freeze. Emerging from the darkness, a lone figure stepped forward. Karen, her eyes ablaze with fury. "I knew it was only a matter of time before you pathetic fools tried something like this," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "And now, you're going to pay the price." Samantha and her team braced themselves for the confrontation, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and determination. They knew that this was the moment of truth, the final showdown in the war for control of the HOA. As the two sides collided, a fierce and desperate battle ensued, with both sides fighting tooth and nail for the upper hand. The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome would determine the fate of the entire neighborhood. The air was thick with tension as Samantha and her team faced off against the enraged Karen. The corrupt HOA president had caught them red-handed, and they knew that there was no turning back. In a desperate bid to seize the upper hand, Samantha and her team fought with a ferocity born of desperation. They knew that the future of their community hung in the balance, and they were willing to do whatever it took to emerge victorious. The battle raged on, with both sides trading blows and employing every trick in the book. Samantha could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins as she matched Karen's every move, her determination fueling her every action. As the chaos unfolded, a sudden realization dawned on Samantha. They were winning. The HOA's records were in a state of disarray, and Karen's control was slipping through her fingers. With a final, desperate surge, Samantha and her team managed to overwhelm Karen and her cronies, seizing control of the HOA's servers and deleting the vast majority of their records. As the dust settled, Karen stared at them, her eyes wild with fury. "You won't get away with this," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "I'll make sure you all pay for this betrayal." Samantha straightened her shoulders, her gaze unwavering. "It's over, Karen. Your reign of terror is done. The homeowners have taken back control, and will never let you or the HOA hurt us again." Karen's lips twisted into a snarl, but before she could react, the sound of sirens pierced the air. The police had been alerted to the disturbance, and they were closing in fast. Knowing that their time was up, Samantha and her team quickly made their escape, slipping out into the darkness. As they fled, they could hear the distant shouts of Karen and her cronies, their voices filled with anguish and despair. In the days that followed, the news of the homeowners' daring raid on the HOA's headquarters spread like wildfire through the community. The corrupt organization was in shambles, its power and influence shattered beyond repair. Samantha and her fellow homeowners had won a hard-fought victory, but they knew that the battle was far from over. The war for control of the HOA had been won, but the struggle to rebuild their community and restore a sense of trust and unity would be an ongoing challenge. As she looked out over the neighborhood, Samantha couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and determination. They had taken a stand against the tyranny of the HOA, and they had emerged victorious. Now it was time to forge a new path forward, one that would ensure the safety and well-being of their community for generations to come.